Om Namo Bhagavate Śrī Aruṇācala Ramanaya. Namaskaram. Today I'm going to be talking about verse 10 of Śrī Aruṇācala Padigam. And this is a very important verse because Bhagavan often in the verses of Aruṇācala Stuti Panchakam, he refers to the efficacy of the thought of Aruṇācala in verses of Aksharam and elsewhere. He refers to this, but in this verse, Bhagavan clearly explains what happens when we think of Aruṇācala and how that thought of Aruṇācala bestows liberation. So what he says in this verse is, I'll first read the verse in Tamil and then I'll read the meaning and then explain in more detail. Patanum pudumai vili kanta parvadam orudanam idanai otidum virin seteye oduki orudana dabimukamaha itidai tambol achalamache dav innui balikolum ikden otuminui kal ulamadilloriv we koli Arunama Giriye. It's a very, very beautiful verse. Particularly the last line. What Bhagavan says in this verse is, I have seen a wonder, the magnetic hill that forcibly seizes the soul, subduing the mischievous activity of the soul who thinks of it once, pulling to be facing towards its unique self, making it be motionless like itself. It will take that sweet soul as Bali. This is what a wonder is this. Souls be saved by thinking of the great Aruna Hill, this killer of the soul who shines in the heart. There's a lot of very deep meaning packed into this verse. He starts by saying, Patanam Pudumai. I have seen Pudumai. Pudumai literally means newness, but it's used in this context in the sense of something that is extraordinary, wonderful, even a miracle it can mean. So I have seen something, I've seen a wonder. What is the wonder? The wonder is Vali Kanta Parvadam, the magnetic hill that forcibly seizes the soul. So Bhagavan describes Aruṇācala as a magnetic hill that forcibly seizes the soul. Just like a magnet seizes and pulls towards itself any piece of iron that is in its proximity, this hill draws us to it. But when as he makes clear in the last line, that is throughout Stuti Panchakam, Bhagavan is talking about the outward form of Aruṇācala and simultaneously talking about the reality of Aruṇācala, which is shining in our heart. So there are, as it were, two double meaning to many of the things that Bhagavan says. He's talking, the meaning both applies to the external form of Aruṇācala, which draws people to it. So we are drawn to physically to the presence of Aruṇācala, but it also means we are drawn within to face the reality of Aruṇācala. If a piece of iron is very rusty, it feels the pull of a magnet less forcibly. As the rust is removed from the piece of iron, and when the iron is in a purer condition, it feels that magnetic pull is more powerful. Like that, so long as our mind is very impure, we will not feel the magnetic pull of Aruṇācala so strongly. But as the mind is purified more and more, we will feel that magnetic pull. both the pull towards the external form of Aruṇācala and the pull towards the internal reality of Aruṇācala, which is ever shining in our heart as I. Bhagavan, this isn't the only place where Bhagavan refers to Aruṇācala as a magnetic hill. Well, here he refers to it as a magnetic hill. In Aksharamala, he prays to Aruṇācala just like iron attracts magnet. Sorry, just like a magnet attracts iron, attract me and be one with me. That is, Kantami Rumbupol, like a magnet to iron. Kantami Rumbupol, Kavandene Vidamo, Kalandeno Dirupaya Aruṇācala. Forcibly attract me and make me and joining with me. Kantami Rumapol, Kavandu. Kavandu means attracting, drawing. Kavandu, ene vidamo, without leaving. Kalandeno dirupai, unite with me in such a way that we do not separate, but we do not leave each other, but we become one, is the implication. So in the first sentence, he says Aruṇācala is a magnetic hill. Then in the second sentence, which is a long sentence, he explains what happens when we think of Aruṇācala even once. The whole sentence is Orudaram idane otidum virin seteye oduki orutanudu abhimukamaha etu ade tambol achalama chedu of Inuit Balikolum Ichten, or Ichten is the next sentence, actually, Balikolum. That means subduing the mischievous activities of the soul who thinks of it evil, who thinks of it once, pulling to be facing towards its unique self, making it be motionless like itself. It will take that sweet soul as Bali. I'll go through this clause by clause. Orudaram idane otidum wir means the soul who thinks of it even once. Well, it's not even is not there, but if the soul who thinks of it once. Orudaram means once. Idane means it, referring to Aruṇācala. Otidum wir, the soul who thinks of it. So what does it do to the soul who thinks of it once? That virin sheshteye oduki. Sheshte means it's a Sanskrit word that means activity, but in Tamil it particularly means the mischievous activity. If a child is misbehaving, you say, "Stop your sheshte." So it's got that. Though it doesn't directly mean mischievous activity, it has the connotation of mischievous activity. So what is the mischievous activity of the soul? The outward going activity of the mind. That is what is referred to here. So when we think of Aruṇācala once, it starts by subduing the mischievous outward going activity of the mind. That is the implication. How does it subdue that? The grace of Aruṇācala is always working within our heart to gradually purify our mind. The impurities in the mind are the Vishaya Vasanas. The Vishaya Vasanas means the inclination to experience Vishayas. Vishayas means objects or phenomena. So anything other than ourself is a Vishaya. So the inclination to attend to and experience things other than ourselves are Vishaya Vasanas. Under the sway of our Vishaya Vasanas, our mind goes outwards and is constantly attending to things other than ourselves. So the mischievous activity of the mind is that outward going activity, but occurs under the sway of the Vishaya Vasanas. So the Vishaya Vasanas are the impurities. By the grace of Aruṇācala, those impurities are slowly being weakened. So the mind is being cleansed, it's being purified by his grace. And the mind is purified, the more we come under the influence of his magnetic pull. So he starts, as I say, he starts by saying, Orudaram idane otidum wirin sheshteye oduki, subduing the mischievous activity of the soul who thinks of it once. Then in the next clause he says, Oru tanadu abhimukamaha irtu. That means pulling it to be facing towards its unique self, towards itself. But he adds a word there, oru. Oru means one, as an adjective. So it's a description of tanadu in this context means itself, referring to Aruṇācala. So tanadu abhimukham means facing towards itself, and he describes itself as oru, as one. One also has the implication of being unique, special, peerless. And it also has the implication of itself the one, the only one, the one reality, the one without a second, ekkameva dvitiyam, that one, that is Aruṇācala. It is that Aruṇācala is nothing but the one thing that actually exists, the sole reality, but that which is described in the Upanishads as ekam eva advaitiyam, the one only without a second, that pure being, that is Aruṇācala. So that is what Bhagavan implies by saying oru tanadu abhimukamaha. So that we can also take the pulling towards itself the one reality, the one thing that actually exists. So first it subdues the outward going activity of the mind, then it pulls it within to face itself. Bhagavan doesn't explicitly say pulling within, but that is the implication. Because since Aruṇācala is the one, it cannot be something other than ourself. So it has to be our own reality. So when he pulls us within to face him, we're not facing something other than ourselves. We're facing our own reality, what we actually are. And the Sanskrit word abhimukham means facing towards. So tanadu abhimukham means facing towards itself. And itself is ourself, because it is nothing but our own reality. And itu means pulling. This itu Bhagavan it's a word Bhagavan often uses, the sense that Aruṇācala is pulling towards us. So when it pulls it towards us to face itself, what happens then? Ade tan bol achala chedu, that is making it be motionless like itself. That is, so long as we're attending to anything other than ourselves. That is, let's put it this way, attending to anything other than ourselves is an activity, a mental activity. But when we turn our attention back towards ourselves, that is not an activity, that is the cessation of activity. Because as Bhagavan has made clear, the nature of ego is to rise, stand, and flourish by attending to things other than itself, but subside and dissolve back into its source by attending to itself. So that's the implication of what Bhagavan says in verse 25 of Ulladu. That is, when he talks there about grasping form, the forms are all Vishayas, things other than, because he describes ego as Uruvatra Payahande, the formless demon ego. So ego has no form of its own, so whatever forms it grasps, they're things other than itself. And it grasps them by attending to them. So when he says Urupatriundam, grasping form, it comes into being. Urupatri Nikum, grasping form it stands or it endures. Urupatri Undu Mika Ongum, grasping and feeding on forms it flourishes abundantly. Uruvittu Urupatram, leaving form it grasps form. So the very nature of ego is to grasp form, grasp vishayas, things other than itself. And that is an activity. But when instead of trying to grasp other things, if it tries to grasp itself, because it itself is just formless awareness, when it tries to grasp itself, it thereby subsides, as he indicates by saying, Teidinal otum pidicum. If sought, it takes flight. So if ego, instead of grasping other things, if it tries to grasp itself, in other words, if it turns its attention back towards itself, it thereby subsides. So that is what Bhagavan is referring to when he talks about Oru Tanadu Abhimukamaha Irtu, pulling to be facing towards itself, the one. Itself is ourself. So Tanadu can be taken either way, but Tanadu in this context, it's referring to Aruṇācala, meaning itself. But Aruṇācala is ourself, so it also implies ourself. So when he pulls us towards ourself, we subside, and thereby he makes us motionless like himself. Ade means that, referring to the soul who has thought of it even once. Ade tanbol. Tanbol means like itself, like Aruṇācala. Achalam archedu, that is making to be motionless like itself. So by pulling our attention within to face itself, shining in our heart as the one reality, it thereby makes us motionless like itself. And then he says, so it makes him motionless like itself. And what does it do then? Av inuir bali kolum. It takes that sweet soul as bali. Bali means the food that is offered in sacrifice. It also can mean food offered as alms, but the primary meaning is food offered in sacrifice. And he refers to the soul as innuir. In means sweet. Why is it how is it a sweet soul? It is sweet because by the action of Aruṇācala's grace, it is purified. And when it becomes pure, it becomes ripe, it becomes pakva. And so it is sweet, it is fit to eat. Aruṇācala is a very fussy eater. It will not eat us until we are fully ripened, fully sweetened, fully well cooked. We have to be very well cooked or well ripened before Aruṇācala will eat us. What that implies is Aruṇācala will not eat us, will not consume us until we are willing to surrender ourselves completely to him. We will be willing to surrender ourselves to him only when our mind has been fully purified by his grace. So by the process of his grace, he is purifying us and thereby ripening us, thereby cooking us, preparing us to become a sweet dish to consume. That's the implication. That is just this one word, small one-syllable word, in, means sweet, but there's so much implication there in that. I mean, in every word Bhagavan uses, that it's so beautifully expressed. So, but how can we become that sweet soul? Only by the action of his grace. But as Bhagavan often said, grace is not something external to ourselves. Grace is not something up in heaven that is one day going to descend down upon us. Grace is ever shining in our heart as our own being. So that grace is always working. But as Bhagavan said, the grace works through us. So we have to, so long as we're going outwards, so long as we're allowing the mind to constantly go outwards, we are resisting, we are obstructing the work of grace. So for grace to do its work, we have to yield ourselves to it. even to yield ourselves to grace is possible only by grace. So it's all the process of grace, but we are involved in that process. That is, so long as we are enthusiastically rushing outwards to attend to things other than ourselves, we are resisting the inward pull of grace. We're resisting that magnetic pull. But the more by His grace we become willing to yield ourselves by trying our best to turn within and to attend to Him in our heart, we thereby become more and more under the sway of His grace. So our cooperation in this process is necessary. Even our cooperation is also by His grace, but it's not we can, oh, I'll leave it to grace, let grace do it. I can just go on living my life. I can go on seeking pleasures in the external world and let grace do its work. It's not going to work like that. But grace works through us. We have to be willing to yield ourselves to grace by trying our best to turn within. The grace is always pulling us inwards, but we have to cooperate by trying to turn within. Because if we're not trying to turn within, we're trying to rush outwards and thereby resisting the grace. So everything is done by grace. As Bhagavan often used to say, grace is the beginning, the middle, and the end. It's grace that draws us to this path. It's grace that leads us along this path. And it is grace that will finally consume us. That the final consuming is what he refers to in this, the last clause of this sentence. Avinui bali kolom. It will take that sweet soul as bali. That means implies that it will consume us entirely. So this sentence is such, there's so much very deep meaning in this sentence, and it's such an important sentence because it shows the efficacy of, and it shows how the grace works. It also shows that is, for example, in verse 8 of Upadesha Undiyā, Bhagavan says, Anya bhavatin avanahamahum ananya bhavame undipara anatinum utamum undipara. He says, Anya bhavam means meditation on what is other, implying in the context meditation on God as something other than ourselves. Ananya means what is not other. So Ananya Bhava is meditating upon God as nothing other than ourselves. And he qualifies Ananya Bhava as Avanahamahum, the Ananya Bhava in which He is I. So that implies when we understand that God is not something external to us, but is our own, but is what is shining in our heart as I, we then meditate upon Him as I. So what the meaning of the verse is, rather than Anya Bhava, taking God to be something other than ourselves and meditating upon Him accordingly, Ananya Bhava, meditating on Him as nothing other than ourselves, with the understanding that He is I, that is anatinam uttamam, that is best among all. But though Bhagavan says that, that isn't to say that Anya Bhava does not have its efficacy. That is, it is because it is by when we worship God as something other than ourselves, our mind is thereby gradually purified. And as a result of that purification, we then get the clarity to understand that God cannot be something other than ourselves. God is the infinite whole, so nothing can be other than God. We cannot be other than God, then God cannot be other than us. God is our own reality, our own being. So with that clarity, we meditate upon Him as ourself. So that is best among all. But that doesn't mean that Anya Bhava is not efficacious. So in this sentence, Bhagavan is also showing how we transition from the from the Anya Bhava to the Ananya Bhava, because he starts by saying the soul who thinks of it even once. In this context, that implies who thinks of the external form of Aruṇācala. Of course, whenever Bhagavan talks about thinking of Aruṇācala, it has a double meaning. It means both thinking of the external form of Aruṇācala and thinking of the internal reality of Aruṇācala, because Aruṇācala is always shining in our heart as I. So it has that double meaning. But the way this sentence is going, it implies starting from the Anya Bhava. When we take Aruṇācala to be an external form, when we think of that external form, that external form will that thought of the external form of Aruṇācala will subdue our cheste, our outward going mental activity, and thus it will pull us within to face itself, to face its reality, which is ever shining in our heart as I. Thereby it will make us motionless by itself. And when we become motionless by itself, how do we become motionless? By subsiding. So we subside back into the source from which we've risen, namely our own being, which is Aruṇācala, and thereby it consumes us. Thereby, that is, when we subside completely into the source, we thereby dissolve and remain as we always actually are. So that's what he's referring to here. So in this sentence, he's showing how we transition from the Anya Bhava to the Ananya Bhava, how this all happens by the power of grace. So this sentence is such a hugely important sentence, because it shows both the working, it explains the working of grace, it explains the efficacy of the external form of Aruṇācala, it explains the process of self-investigation. That is, Oru Tanadu Abhimukamaha Etu, pulling to face towards itself. That implies when the mind, by the power of grace, is pulled inwards to face its own reality. So the whole of Bhagavan's teachings, we can say, are included in this one sentence. He's packed everything in there. It's such an important sentence. And most importantly of all, though he doesn't use the word grace in this sentence, what he's talking about is the working of grace. So this sentence makes it clear what a central role the power of his grace plays in this whole process. That is, when we turn our attention within, it's under the sway of grace that we are turning our attention within. And without the power of grace, we would have no inclination to turn within at all, because the nature of ego is to always cling to things other than itself. So the inclination to turn within can come only from grace. It cannot come from, it's contrary to the nature of ego, but it is the nature of ourself as we actually are. It's the nature of that Atma-swarupa. And that Atma-swarupa is grace itself. Atma-swarupa literally means the real nature of ourself. In other words, ourself as we actually are. What we actually are, that is Aruṇācala, that is grace, that is Bhagavan. So all this is packed into that. And therefore, in the next sentence, he simply says, "Ich den." That literally means it's an exclamation. This is what. Implying this is what a wonder, or what a wonder this is. That is how this process of grace works is such a wonder. And without this process of grace, there would be no salvation for us. This is the only way by which we can be saved, because the seeming bondage that we have now is due to our dehabhimana, our attachment to this body as I. That is, the dehabhimana is the very nature of ego. So the only way to be saved is to overcome this ego nature. But since ego's nature is always to go outwards, clinging to things other than itself, it's only by the power of grace that we can get the inclination to turn within. Grace is always pulling us, but even to yield ourselves to that pull is possible only by grace. So this is all the wonderful working of grace. And therefore, he ends this verse in the last line by saying, the first clause, Atma-vichara, literally means souls be saved thinking. Thinking of what? That's what he goes on to describe in the rest of this sentence. Atma-vichara. Vichara is a vocative form of the plural of via. Via means soul. In this context, so it means both life and soul, but in this context it means soul. So, it's the equivalent meaning of jiva in Sanskrit. Vichara, as I say, it's a plural vocative form. So he's addressing all of us, so, souls. Atman, be saved thinking. Thinking of what? He gives a beautiful description. Ulam adil, oli riv, oli iv we koli Arunamagiri. Arunamagiri means the great Aruna hill. This great Aruna hill, and he describes it. Ulam adil, oli, it shines within the heart. And it's also, he describes it as we koli Arunamagiri. We koli means the killer of the soul. So the whole sentence means souls be saved thinking of the great Aruna hill, this killer of the soul who shines in the heart. So he's the killer of the soul. That means he's a destroyer of ego. That is the very many different names and forms of God, and different names and forms of God have different, all the power of God is there in every name and form. Whatever name and form we worship, full power of God is there. But particular names and forms are associated with particular powers. So if if you're facing obstacles, you pray to Ganapati, and Ganapati will remove the obstacles. If you're seeking wealth, you worship Lakshmi because she's the goddess of wealth. If you're seeking learning, you worship Saraswati, the goddess of learning. Like that, the different particular qualities are associated with different names and forms, although they're all different names and forms of the one God. So what is the special quality associated with this particular name and form of God? Aruṇācala, it is, as Bhagavan says in the first verse of Aksharamai, Aruṇācala mena ahamene bhava deve rarupai Aruṇācala. Aruṇācala, you eradicate the ego of those who think of you in the heart as Aruṇācala. The ahame has a double meaning. It means both in the heart, and it also means only I. So who inwardly meditate, but only Aruṇācala is I. That is what is shining in our heart as I. That is Aruṇācala. So, but the speciality of Aruṇācala is eradicating ego. That is the significance of the story of the origin of Aruṇācala. Aruṇācala appeared as a column of fire between Brahma and Vishnu when they were quarreling about which of them is greater. So that implies that it is ego that makes us say, I am greater, you're lesser than me. So Aruṇācala appeared as a column of fire in order to subdue the egos, even of the greatest of great gods. So what to say about the efficacy of Aruṇācala? So if it can destroy the egos of the greatest gods, can it not destroy our petty little ego? So Aruṇācala is all about destroying ego. That is what he means here when he says, Ivviya Kali this killer of the soul. So he describes Aruṇācala as the killer of the soul, and he emphasizes Ulam Adil Oli. It shines within the heart. So though it appears externally in the form of a mountain, even when it's appearing in the form of a mountain, it's ever shining in our heart as our own reality. Why does it appear outwardly in the form of a mountain? Because of our outward going, because the nature of our mind is to be outward going. So long as we identify this ourselves as I am this body, we thereby make ourselves seemingly finite. And as a finite jiva, as a finite soul, we cannot know the infinite reality that we actually are. So in order to as a support for us, so long as we take ourselves to be a form, God appears as a form, externally as a form. As Bhagavan says in the 4th verse of Ulladu Uruvum Tanayin Ulhu Paramatran. If one's self is a form, the world and God will be likewise. That is, so long as we experience ourselves as a form, we cannot know what is formless. That is, we can know only forms. So because we mistake ourselves to be the form of this body, the world appears to be a multitude of forms, and even God appears as a form. That is, whatever idea we have of God, whatever conception we have of God, that conception is a form. Even if we say, oh no, I don't believe in God, I don't believe God is a form, I think God is has no form, God is infinite. These are all just finite conceptions. So any mental conception is a form. So we cannot know God as formless so long as we take ourselves to be a form. This is something, a subject Bhagavan deals with in more detail in Aruṇācala Ashtakam, which I'll be talking about after I've completed. Well, the next verse I'm going to be talking about later in this month is verse 11, which is the final verse of Aruṇācala Padigam. Then from the beginning of next month, I'll be talking about Aruṇācala Ashtakam. So in Aruṇācala Ashtakam, Bhagavan makes this very clear. We cannot know God as formless so long as we know ourselves as a form. But so we can know him as formless only because God is formless. He's the infinite whole. We cannot know him as an object. So we can know him only by being him. And in order to be him, we need to be consumed by him. As Bhagavan says in verse 21 of Ulladu, he ends with saying, Unadal Khan, becoming food is seeing. So we know him as he actually is only by being consumed by him. That's why he said in the main sentence, the long sentence in this verse, it will take that sweet soul as Bali. Avinui Bali Kolum. Bali Kolum means taking as Bali implies he will consume it. So only when we become food for God will we truly know God. Because when we become food to him, we will thereby remain as him, will be him, and we can know him only by being him. If we try to know him without being him, we're trying to know him as an object. How can the infinite reality be an object? So he cannot be, we can never know him. Well, we can know him as an object. We can see God in name and form, but that is not the real seeing. The real seeing is only, as Bhagavan explains, he explains it very nicely in verse 8 of Ulladu. What he says in verse 8 of Ulladu is, Eper itu eburuvil etinoma peruruvil aporole kan vari adu. That means whoever worships in whatever form, giving whatever name, that is the way to see that portal, that substance, in name and form. So if we worship God in name and form, we can see God in name and form. But that is not, the implication in the next sentence is that seeing him in name and form is not the real seeing, because he then goes on to say, Ainum. Ainum means however. Ammeipolin unmeil tan unmeine ondu odungi ondrudele unmeil kanal una. To make the meaning of this sentence clear, we have to slightly change the order of words around. That is, ainum tan unmeine ondu, knowing one's own reality, ammeipolin unmeil odungi, subsiding or merging in the reality of that real substance, ondrudele, becoming one. Unmeil Karnal is seeing in reality. So to see him in reality, to see him as he actually is, we need to know our own reality, thereby subside in his reality, in the reality that is him, and thereby subside and become one with it. That is seeing him in reality. So in this 10th verse, all this is explaining how he draws us within, makes us motionless like himself, and then consumes us. That is what he's talking about in verse 8 as knowing one's own reality and thereby subsiding and merging in his reality and becoming one with it. That is the seeing in truth. That's what he's describing here. He pulls us within to face himself, makes us motionless like himself, and thereby consumes us. So Aruṇācala is this. This is the speciality of Aruṇācala. Is this the final task of God? Is this task of destroying us? It is said that there are five divine functions, panchakritiyas. That is creation, sustenance, dissolution, veiling, and grace. The creation, sustenance, and dissolution, the shishti, sthiti, and samhara, that means the creation of the world, the sustenance of the world, the maintenance of the world, and the dissolution of the world. These all happen only in the view of ourself as ego. So it's only when we are when we don't know ourselves as we actually are, when we don't know God, we know this appearance of creation, sustenance, and dissolution. So so long as we have desire to experience these three, so long as we have desire to experience this creation and the perpetuation of this creation, God, by his grace, he keeps us veiled. That's the meaning of Tirubhava or Tirudana. That means veiling or, the veiling, the keeping himself hidden from our view. But eventually, when we want freedom from this perpetual cycle, from this samsara, this perpetual cycle of birth and death, creation and dissolution, that is the life of each one of us is a miniature. We are born, that's a creation. We go through our life, that's a sustenance, and at the end, the samhara takes place. We die. So this is going on. This is the nature of manifestation: appearing, sustaining, disappearing. So our life and death are just like that. When we want an end to this samsara, then we pray to God for our liberation from this samsara. Then that's when the final task of God, the anugraha. Anugraha means grace. The etymology of anugraha is very nice. Graha means grasping. Anu means following. So the implication of anugraha, God has to come after us and grasp us to save us. Just like if a small child is playing on the side of a road and goes out into the road, the mother or father will come after it, grasp it, and pull it back to safety. God comes after us to save us from our own folly, from our own ignorance. So this is the final task of grace. So that grace is, in order to be saved from this cycle of birth and death, from this creation, sustenance, and dissolution, we all this this creation, sustenance, and dissolution is only for ego. So in order to save us from this, ego must be destroyed. So Aruṇācala is the final function, that is the work of Aruṇācala is the final function of God, the anugraha. That is the work of Guru. It is Guru who is to save us by eradicating ego. So Aruṇācala is Guru's Swarupa. He's God doing his final task, the task of grace, the task of annihilating ego. So there's so much meaning, deep meaning and implication in this verse. It's such an important verse. Om Namo Bhagavate Śrī Aruṇācala Ramanaya.
There's a question from Rati. I think she'd like, this is on the verse, and I think she wants to ask it herself.
Yes, Michael, Namo Ramanaya. I think you have you've said everything. I don't know what's left to be said, but when you said about the achalam, we turn towards the uyir cheshte odiki, this mountain Parvata pulls us, Kanda Parvatan pulls us, Iritir, it pulls us towards us. And what it actually seems to be doing is pulling us towards the achalam in our own hearts,
Yes.
the achalam within, because we are achala. We are actually, the chanchala is only from ego, from knowing that we're an uir or a jiva or a soul.
Yes.
But when we let go of the chanchala, then there is the achalam, the achalam of Aruṇācalam in our heart. But then again, to realize that the merging with Aruṇācala or being consumed as Bali by Aruṇācala is actually the your form and his form become formless, and there is no form remaining.
Yes.
There is no form remaining, really. It's a formlessness, because there is no form remaining even ultimately. And that oru that is there, you arising, I or you or whoever is arising as ego will subside into that formless achalam state of Aruṇācalam. And that is the power of Aruṇācalam. And when he says even in that, when you, in this verse especially, that when you dwell on the what a wonder, pudumai, the wonder, the newness, the wonder, the miraculous power to draw within. And this is the great aid of Aruṇācalam, that if you just turn, even for all of us who have a difficult time, any time of day or night, we have this wonderful aid where we can just turn within to Aruṇācalam. The image of Aruṇācalam itself stills us to the achalam within us, achala within us. And in doing that, again, when you speak of grace, though, I would like you to speak a little more about buddhi and mati, because buddhi is when we use our ego, or the egoic intent. Mati is a similar thing, but more about the special intelligence that it takes to to realize that our will is really his will. And the more we merge our will with his will, then it's his will alone that operates. I mean, it is his will alone that operates all the time, but we think we arise as we thinking we have will, but actually, it's his will. But then, I don't know how to word it. Maybe you can carry on here.
Okay, well, regarding buddhi and mati, mati is a word that has, like many words, it has different meanings in different contexts. In some contexts, mati means intellect. It means the same as buddhi. But mati can also be used in the sense of will. When we talk about vidhi mati, Vidhi means fate, mati means will. So depends on the exact meaning of mati depends on the context. For example, in verse 19 of Ulladu, where Bhagavan talks about vidimati mulam vivekam ilake, vidimati vellam vivadam. The quarrel about which prevails, fate or will, is only for those who do not know the root of fate and will. The root of fate and will is ego. That is, when we rise as ego, we have a will of our own. We misuse that will to do karma. The karma bears fruit, which we experience in the form of vidhi, fate. So if we know the reality of ego, which is the root of fate and will, the ego will thereby be dissolved, and fate and will be dissolved along with it. But so long as we rise as ego, we seem to have we have a will of our own, and we consequently experience fate. You say God's will always prevails. Yes, of course, God's wills always prevail, but we and God are not two different things. When we rise as ego, we seemingly separate ourselves from God, but God is always our own reality. So we always have freedom of will. That is, freedom is our real nature. God is infinitely free because he's one without a second. So there's nothing other than him to limit his freedom. So what we actually are is infinite freedom. When we rise as ego, we limit ourselves. We limit our being, we limit our awareness, we limit our happiness, we limit our love, we limit our freedom. So what is in our real nature unlimited becomes seemingly limited when we rise as ego. So as ego, we have freedom. We have freedom of will and freedom of action. But of course, our freedom is limited because we are limited. But the freedom is our real nature. So that can never be completely. That can be seemingly limited, but it can never be completely denied. So as Bhagavan always made clear, we have freedom of will and we have freedom of action. Because we misuse our freedom of will and action, our Ichcha Kriya Swatantra, we do karma, and the fruit of that karma we experience as fate. There was something else when you were talking. One other point about this verse occurred to me, and then it came to me, and then it slipped my mind. It was something about the Oru, about the one, but I've forgotten now what it was.
Yes, Oru. Oru meaning, I mean, we are, you and I and God, if we take God to be a form, when we are a form.
Yes.
However, when we subside into our hearts, into our Guhai Namah Shivaya, then we are the formless, and we are
Yes.
Achalam, we are Arunachalam, and we
Yes.
are not even Arunachalam. Then even Arunachalam itself is subsided into just the Satchitananda, Satchitan Satchit.
Aruṇācala is always subsided in Satchit. I mean,
In Satchitananda, yes.
Aruṇācala, there's no rising. Oh, yes, I
Yes.
remember what I was going to say. What I was going to say is another important thing to remember. Then Bhagavan says, Achalamad Chedav, Chedu, making Tanbol Achalam
Tanpul
Chedu,
Atalam Chachalam Chedu.
making us motionless like itself. That's another very important thing we have to understand from this. The real nature of Aruṇācala is Achalam. Achalam means motionless, because Aruṇācala is pure being. Being doesn't do anything, it just is as it is. So, as Bhagavan makes clear in Nana, in the 15th paragraph of Nana, all these panchakritis, these 5 divine functions that I was talking about earlier, Bhagavan says all these happen Isan Sanidana Visesha Matratal, by the special nature of the presence of God. the presence of God means the being of God. Because God is being, he is omnipresent. He's present everywhere. So by his just being, so the presence of God implies the being of God. So all these things happen just by his being, because God never actually does anything. He is eternally achala. He's eternally motionless. But everything happens as it's meant to happen by the power of his mere being. Why is this? Because his being is also love. His infinite being is infinite love. Because he is our own being, he doesn't see us as other than himself. So he loves us as himself. That is why his love is infinite. Because he doesn't see any separation. If you love of one for another is always limited, because the one who is loving is limited, and whatever it seems to be other than itself is also thereby limited. So long as we take God to be other than ourselves, even if we say God is infinite, even if we say we believe God is infinite, we're still limiting God as something other than ourselves. Whatever is other has to be limited. If we are other than God, God is thereby limited because he's not everything. He excludes. We are excluded from him. So if God is infinite, as he has to, I mean, there's no meaning of a finite God. If God is infinite, he cannot be other than ourselves. He is our own being. And as being, his nature is motionless. But he doesn't need to do anything. Everything happens as it's meant to happen by his mere, as Bhagavan says, Isan Sanidana Visesha Matrita, the special nature of the presence of God. His presence is his being, and his special nature is that it is infinite love. So everything happens as it's meant to happen just by the power of his love. The power of his love is what we call grace. So Bhagavan does everything without ever doing anything. So this whole process of grace that he describes in this verse, it all happens not by his doing anything, but by his just being as he always actually is. And
Yes.
by that power of grace, he makes us like that. He makes us motionless like itself, and thereby feeds upon us. So there's so much very deep meaning in this verse. Deep, not in meaning, there's deep implication in this verse.
Yes, and subsiding in being is ultimately uh, being is jnana. Being is
Well,
jnana is
yeah,
just, but there is nothing left. There is
yeah,
nothing. There's nothing to arise and say I'm doing or acting or thinking
yeah.
or feeling or anything. I mean, a
As
feeling,
Bhag,
well,
as
feeling is the love. Love, I mean, love, peace, and it's all being, which is
yeah,
jnana. And so
and
jnana may, it's just, so achalam is jnana, that is just the jnana is,
yes,
there's
yes, yes.
jnana may, there is no jnani, there's only jnanam, in
But
that sense.
jnana itself is jnani.
Jnana, yes, jnana, yes.
Jnana may jnani, as Bhagavan
Jnana
often
may,
uses.
yes, yes,
Jnana alone is jnani.
yeah.
Talking about subsiding and being, that's what Bhagavan is talking about in verse 10 of Upadesha Undiyar. Udita idatel, in the place from which we rose, or dungi iratel, subsiding and being, or being having subsided in the place from which we rose, that is karma and bhakti, that is yoga and jnana. So the whole spiritual path is ultimately about nothing other than subsiding and being, thereby being as we actually are. That subsiding is his pulling us within to face himself. Thereby, when we subside, we thereby become motionless like him, and he feeds upon us. That means we become one with him. We merge back into him. Of course, we're always one with him, but when we rise as ego, we seemingly separate ourselves. That separation is dissolved by his grace. That is the function of grace. That is the function of Guru.
Yes, true.
That is the function of Aruṇācala.
Yeah. We lose the Anya Bhava and realize Ananya Bhava,
Yes,
which
exactly.
is which is, yes,
Exactly.
Namo Ramanaya.
Yeah, Namo Ramana.
Sanjay, you wanted to ask a question on this verse?
Yes. So, sir, it is not exactly on this verse, but what you said recently, what you said earlier in your talk today, you said whatever form of God we pray to, that form has full power. How do we understand this?
Because why God has many different forms? God is one. Whatever form he appears in, he is one. But the mind has a taste in multiplicity. So at a more immature stage in the path of bhakti, we worship many gods. We have some difficulties, we go to a Ganapati temple to remove the obstacles in our life. We want wealth, we go and worship Lakshmi. We want learning, we go and worship Saraswati. We worship different names and forms for different things. But as the devotion matures, we come to understand God is one, not many. So we then the mind is drawn to one particular name and form of God. That is called the Ishtadeva. So when we are drawn to one Ishtadeva, we then understand it was my Ishtadeva, my beloved Rama or beloved Krishna or beloved Aruṇācala, whatever our Ishtadeva is, it's that same Ishtadeva, but appears in the form of all these other gods and goddesses. So we come to the understanding all are one, and we cling to one name and form. That is a more mature bhakti, when we cling to one. That is the spiritual path. The path of yoga, any path of yoga, is a movement from many to one. Because manyness is unreal, oneness is real. So the ultimate goal of all spiritual paths is the state of oneness. One only without a second. That is why Advaita is the ultimate goal of all of spirituality. But in order to reach that, there are so many steps on the way there. So all these other different philosophies, different practices, different forms of devotion, these are all appropriate, but they're all ultimately tending towards oneness. So if we understand that God is one, whatever form you worship, if you take that form to be God, that form has to have all the powers. It's only when we don't have a deep understanding of the truth that God is one, but we worship different names and forms for hoping to get different benefits.
But so that power is a conception we have in our mind. Because
Well, his power is infinite. We can't limit it to our mind. We have a mental conception of his power, but his power is far greater than any mental conception we can form of it.
So what I was trying to say is, if I visualize a vigraha of, say, a Ganesha, and if I feel it has got some power to remove my difficulties,
yes,
that power, that specific power is my mental conception. It's my idea. That specific power.
Yes, but it is. You have a mental conception of that power, but that power is not merely your mental conception. You're conceiving something that is very much more real than you can ever grasp by your mind. That is, the power of God is infinite. Whatever conception we have of God's power is finite. That's why we can never know God as he is, so long as we rise as ego. So it's only by, as Bhagavan says, only by becoming becoming food is seeing. So we know him as he actually is only by being him, and we can be him only by being swallowed by him. Until then, whatever conception we have of God, it's a conception. God is far greater than any conception we can possibly have of him.
So, sir, if we believe that a particular God there, like a Shakti, has got some special power, if we believe in that,
yes,
that is in some way that is real.
Yes,
In some
definitely.
way,
Yes.
Yeah. Because it's not,
Yeah.
it's not our mental conception, it's going beyond our mental conception.
Yes.
So it is.
His power is always far greater than whatever we can conceive of him. So if we have a conception that Ganapati will remove our obstacles, that conception is true, but it doesn't limit the power of Ganapati. Ganapati has infinite power. If Ganapati is God, he has to have infinite power. So all these different names and forms are to suit the limitations of our view. But ultimately, God is beyond all limitations.
So, sir, like we say that Arunachala has got the power to attract us. So is any other God which has got that special power? Means
for if you're a Krishna Bhakta, whatever we say about Arunachala, the Krishna Bhakta can say about Krishna.
That's real.
It's true. So it's because once we're talking of names and forms, we're talking in terms of limitations. So for the Shiva Bhakta, Shiva is supreme. For the Vishnu Bhakta, Narayana is supreme. For the Krishna Bhakta, Krishna is supreme. All are correct because there's one supreme. That one supreme appears in many names and forms. In the Vedas itself, it is said, the truth is one. Sages talk of it as call it by many names.
So, sir, if we say that Krishna has got power to attract us like Arunachala, that's true.
Yes.
That's also true.
It's also true, yes. And it's also true if a Muslim says, no, Allah has the power to attract like a magnet. That's true for him. For the Christian, Jesus is that power. It's all, ultimately that power is one. And that power is, as Bhagavan says, it's shining in our heart. And its ultimate function is to be the killer of the soul. That is the final work of grace. And when the soul is killed, all differences are killed along with it.
So though the external form of Arunachala has got a special power, that power is not limited to that form. Other forms also.
How can the power of Arunachala be limited? For us, it's a focus. Like Ramakrishna Paramahamsa used a nice analogy. That milk is milk is pervading the body of the cow. But to get the milk, you have to go to the udder and milk the udder. You can't start milking the ear of the cow and expect to get milk. So likewise, we go to different names and forms. It's just like the udder of the cow. It serves a function, but ultimately, God is beyond all names and forms.
You said it one
But when we say God is beyond all names and form, that doesn't mean we should put down the worship of name and form. Worship of name and form, as Bhagavan says, so long as we are a form, the world and God will be likewise. We cannot conceive of God as formless. We may have an idea God is formless, but our very idea of a formless God is itself a mental conception. That's a mental form. So we can know God as formless only by knowing ourselves and thereby subsiding and becoming one with him.
So in short, sir, devotees of Bhagwan should not believe that only Arunachala has got that power. Means we believe that Arunachala, the hill, has got that power to attack us.
You can believe that only Arunachala has that power for you. But don't go telling someone else. Don't go and tell a Krishna Bhakta, stop worshipping Krishna, come and worship Arunachala. Arunachala alone has that power. That would be meaningless. So for the Bhakta, it's good to have one Ishtadeva and believe all power is in that Ishtadeva. But that doesn't mean you should put down other names and forms. Because what is that is it's a very immature. There are some people, even among Vedantins, there are some Vedantins who, a very prominent group of Vedantins nowadays, say Krishna alone is the supreme personality of the Godhead. All the other gods and goddesses, they're all demigods. That's fine for them. If they want to believe that, it's not going to do anyone any harm. But it's a very immature type of understanding. Much more mature understanding is, yes, my beloved God is Krishna. So I worship God only in the form of Krishna. But all these other gods, they're different forms of Krishna. He's taken different forms to appeal to different people. That's a much more mature way of understanding it. But everyone understands at their own level. So we're not to criticize others. We're not to put down others, because the same grace that has led us to our level of understanding is leading everyone else to the so we'll all eventually be led to the point where we, as Krishna says, surrender all your dharmas and take refuge in him. So when we take refuge in God, we leave aside all our beliefs and everything. We totally trust in him, and thereby by surrendering to him, we allow him to pull us within to see him as he actually is, shining in our heart as our own being.
We should have a very broad view. We should not limit the power to Arunachala hill.
For our devotion, everything we can take as Arunachala, but that doesn't mean that we need to understand that the same power that we see in Arunachala, other people see in their particular Ishtadeva. And they have we are no more right than them, they're no more right than us. It's according to sometimes the Eka Bhakti is compared to the love between a husband and wife. If you're married to a woman, you can think your wife is the most wonderful woman in the world, but you don't go around telling your friends, my wife is the most wonderful wife, your wife is, that would be ridiculous. So we need, Eka Bhakti is good because the mind, as I said, the whole spiritual path, the whole of yoga is a movement towards oneness. So we are leaving the manis and coming to oneness. But we need to understand that that is it. Bhagavan says in Aksharamala, in I think verse 3, he says, when I look upon you as having form, you shine as a hill on earth. But in verse 5, he says, you alone shine in the form of all these, in different religions, in different forms. It's you alone who are shining in all those forms.
Got it.
So it's Arunachala alone that appears in the form of Krishna. Arunachala alone appears in the form of Rama. Arunachala alone appears in the form of Jesus. Arunachala alone appears in the form of Allah. For us, we can take it that way, but we shouldn't go and tell others, oh no, it's only my Arunachala you're worshipping the form of your God. That would be foolish.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. I've taken a lot of time. Thank you.
This is another question on the verse. Yeah, so the question is, on this verse, Michael said 5 aspects: creation, sustenance, destruction, these 3, the dwelling of ego. But what were the other 2? I missed those.
Okay, this is it's not particularly related to this verse, but Bhagavan doesn't directly mention that, but he talks in the 15th paragraph of Nana, he uses the term panchakritya. Panchakritya is a term, I think it's particularly associated with Shaiva philosophy, that or Shaiva theology. That is, that God, that Shiva, or God, has 5 divine functions. His 5 divine functions are Shrishti, creation; Sthiti, which is the sustenance, the sustenance of the world; Samhara is the destruction. That is, just like we undergo a cycle. Every life is a cycle. We're born, we grow up, we live our life, and then we grow old and we die. And we are born again and go. So also it's conceived that the universe is like that. The universe undergoes creation, sustenance, and dissolution. And then it's created and sustained and dissolved again. All this happens within the view of ourself as ego. Ego, as ego, that is, we are able to see all this because we are in ignorance. We don't know our real nature and therefore don't know the real nature of God. So that ignorance is what is described as veiling, tirudana or tirubhava. That is, God keeps us in that ignorance so long as we have desire to experience this creation and sustenance. So long as we have desire for anything other than ourselves, it's God alone who keeps us in ignorance. Not that God wants us to be in ignorance, because we want to enjoy all these things. By his grace, he allows us to, by keeping us in ignorance. That is, veiling means he's veiling our real nature from us. Our real nature and the real nature of God are one and the same. So it is sometimes said he hides himself from us in order for us to experience this creation, sustenance, and dissolution. But finally, when we want liberation, when we want to be free of all this creation, sustenance, and dissolution, we want to be free of this cycle of birth and death, we want to be free of samsara, then we pray to him for liberation. Then he appears in the form of Guru in order to teach us to turn within. This function of Guru is the function of anugraha, grace. It is grace that removes the veil. So God is responsible for the veil so long as we want to remain in ignorance. When we want freedom, then his grace works to remove that veil. Why isn't he removing it here and now? I want liberation. Why doesn't he remove it here and now? We say we do want liberation, but we don't really want liberation. Bhagavan once said, everyone who comes here says that they've come only for liberation. But if I show a small sample of liberation, all the crows will fly away and I'll be left sitting here alone. In other words, Bhagavan is pointing out, we don't yet really want liberation. Liberation sounds very nice. Eternal bliss. Yes, I certainly I'm ready to sign up for that. I want eternal bliss. But there's a price to be paid for it. We have to sacrifice this ego. We're not yet ready to, but sacrificing ego means sacrificing everything. We're not yet ready to sacrifice all that. So even though we're offered eternal bliss, we would prefer to enjoy our little pleasures in this world. So foolish we are. That is the power of Tirodhana, Tirubhava. That is what is removed by grace. So grace is there's a process of grace. Bhagavan talks about Aral Sail, the action of grace. That is, it slowly maturing us, cooking us, ripening us, preparing us, so that we want nothing other than to give ourselves wholly to him. Only when we are willing to give ourselves wholly to him will he give himself wholly to us.
Can I ask a follow-up on this, Michael? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Thank you, Shalini, for the question. So what you're saying, these 5, it's kind of, there is opposites here, like dyads, the same way as Sadhu Om, for instance, describes the 5 aspects of Brahman. So Sat, Chit, Ananda, name and form.
Yes.
So it's like you, as me as a disciple of Bhagavan, wanting to, as much as I can, leave ignorance and turn myself into Arunachala, into light, let's say like that.
Yes.
But so it's the same kind of opposites, the odds that we have here, but in different, how should I say, in different comments or different ways of exposition.
Yes, that is, we can say that is, whatever comes into being has to cease to be. So all manifested things, all appearances, they appear, they remain, and they disappear. So this is the nature. So this is creation, sustenance, dissolution. But what appears is sustained and disappears is subject and objects. That is, the first thing that appears is ego. When ego appears, it projects everything else. And when ego subsides, everything else subsides along with it. And that's what Bhagavan points out in verse 26 of Ulladu. If ego comes into being, everything comes into being. If ego is not, everything is not. So ego itself is everything. So all this creation, sustenance, and dissolution, to whom does this world, this created world, appear? To whom does it seem that this created world is carrying on? Day by day, everything is going on. One event is leading to another event, which is leading to another event. All the ups and downs and everything. It's going on in some way. And just like it, because it came into existence, it will also cease to exist eventually. So this whole play of creation, sustenance, and dissolution all happens only in the view of ego. And ego is under the veil of ignorance. Because so if we know ourselves as we actually are, we will not be at all attracted to any of this creation, sustenance, or will not be attracted to the appearance of anything. So the creation, sustenance, and dissolution all occur under the veil of what is called Tirodhana, that is the veil of ignorance. Anugraha is what removes that veil and thereby puts an end to the whole display of creation, sustenance, and dissolution. But all of these are divine functions. None of these could happen except by Isan Sanidana Visesha Matram, except by the mere special nature of the presence of God. That's what Bhagavan says in verse 15 in the 15th paragraph of Nana.
So it's like what it is said in the first verse of Ulladu, because we see the world. So it's identified the ignorance, so something else needs to be done, Atma-vichara.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Right.
Well, the next question is also, I think, linked to today's verse. So the question is, I seem to come across Vedic practices that seem to say that the inner journey is to become the witness of everything, Sakshi Chaitanya. I suppose if I understand today's verse, this is the state of Achala, which is also reached by the grace of God. I have also read somewhere that Bhagwan used to say that the witness is also ego. So when we turn within, with God's grace, we become achala. Then how does the ego or witness get fully destroyed? I suppose that would also be by God's grace. I guess what I'm getting at is, what is the distinction between the witness and the jnani whose mind is destroyed?
Okay. There's a lot of confusion around this term witness. The original reason why this term sakshi was used was in order to help us distinguish ourselves as the knower from everything that we know. This is what is called drisya viveka. Now we seem to be this person. This person consists of 5 sheaths. It consists of a physical body, the life that animates that physical body, and the mind, intellect, and will that function within that physical body. So these 5 are called the panchakosha. Now we experience these 5 as if they were ourselves. So the first thing we have to do is to distinguish ourselves from these things that we mistake ourselves to be. Because if we don't distinguish ourselves from these things, we won't be able to investigate ourselves. If we're mistaking ourselves to be something other than what we actually are, if we're told to investigate ourselves, we'll be investigating the wrong thing. So we need to distinguish ourselves. So we are told what we actually are is not any of these things we take ourselves to be. We are the witness of all these things. We are the knower of all these things. This body, the prana, the life, the mind, the intellect, and the will. These are all things that are known by us. They're all drisya. We are the drik, the witness, the seer, the knower. So that's one reason why this term sakshi is used. But the term sakshi is also used, for example, Brahman is often referred to as sarva sakshi, the sakshi, the witness of all. It's also referred to as jiva sakshi, the witness of the jiva. What Bhagavan said is, firstly, we need to distinguish when sakshi is used in the sense of the knower and when it is used in another sense. The other sense, Bhagavan said, sakshi means sanadi. So when it is said that if God is the witness of all, or Brahman is the witness of all, that doesn't mean that Brahman is knowing all these things. It means that in the presence of Brahman, everything is happening. That is, everything that happens, all phenomena, appear only in the view of ego. Ego is a limited form of awareness. Awareness is actually only one. There's only one awareness. That one awareness in its true form is pure awareness. Only when there's this seeming identification of I am this body, does that which identifies itself as I am this body, that is ego. That is not pure awareness as it actually is, but it's not something other than pure awareness. That is, jiva is nothing other than Brahman. In the very famous saying, I think it occurs somewhere in one of Shankara's works, Brahma Satyam, Brahman alone is Brahman is real, Jagat Mithya, the world is unreal, Jivo Brahmeva Napara, the Jiva is nothing other than Brahman. So that's what's called Jiva Brahmaikya, the oneness of Jiva and Brahman. What that means is, not that Jiva is Brahman, what Jiva actually is Brahman. Just like we can understand it with the snake and rope analogy. The snake is nothing but a rope. That doesn't mean the rope is a snake. So Jiva is nothing but Brahman. That doesn't mean Brahman is a Jiva. So Brahman is the reality of Jiva. that pure awareness is the underlying reality of transitive awareness, but is called ego. Transitive awareness means the object knowing awareness. So ego is an object knowing awareness, a transitive awareness, whereas Brahman is pure intransitive awareness. Brahman is not aware of anything other than itself. What Brahman knows as itself is what we know as all this multiplicity. So it's if we use witness in the sense of what knows other things, that is ego. A deeper meaning of witness, it's the underlying reality of ego. That is the pure awareness, which is not aware of all this phenomena. It's aware of the reality of all these phenomena, what these phenomena actually are. So, to put it simply, what Brahman knows is one. What we know, we as Jiva know, is many. What we know as many is what Brahman knows as one. And what Brahman knows as one is what we know as many. This is what Bhagavan is alluding to in verse 13 of Ulladu, where he says, Jnanamam tane me, oneself who is awareness alone is real. When he says that, he's referring to what he means by jnana is pure awareness. So what we actually are is pure awareness, that alone is real. And then in the next sentence he says, Nanavam jnanam ajnanamam. Awareness, which is many, is ignorance. In an earlier version of that verse, he had expressed it slightly differently. He said, Jnanam andre unme. Jnana alone is real. Nana vaikan kindra jnanam ajnanamam, or something that is slightly differently. But so there what he says is, the jnana that seizes many is ignorance. So the jnana that seizes many is ego. The awareness that seizes many is ego. What is it seeing as many? The one. So in the view of Brahman, there's only one. In the view of Jiva, ego, there are many. But what we are seeing as many is what Brahman sees as one. So Brahman, because Brahman is the reality of the Jiva, and Jiva is that which knows many things, we can call Jiva as witness, in the sense that it's knowing other things. We can call Brahman as witness in that it's the underlying reality. It's the awareness by which Jiva is knowing many things. So it doesn't mean that Brahman is knowing many things. That's why Bhagavan clarified, when we talk about Brahman being the Sakshi, in that context, Sakshi means sanadhi. It means in the mere presence of Brahman. Without Brahman, nothing could appear, because Brahman is Brahman is Satchit, the pure being awareness, which is like, as Bhagavan said, it's like the screen in the cinema picture, in the cinema. On that screen, all the pictures appear and disappear. Without the screen, you couldn't have any pictures. But the screen is ever unaffected; it ever remains as it is. So the screen is the witness in the sense that it's the presence of the screen that enables everything to appear. The screen is not the witness in the sense the screen is not watching the cinema picture. It's just being as it is. So the way you related it to this verse, no, achala means being as we actually are. When we remain as we actually are, we don't rise as ego, so we don't identify ourselves as a form. Only when we identify ourselves as a form, we experience a multitude of forms. As Bhagavan says in verse 4 of Ulladu, if oneself is a form, the world and God will be likewise. So, and then he says in the next sentence, if oneself is not a form, who can see their forms and how? So when we remain as we actually are, when we remain as Brahman, we don't see any forms. Only when we rise as ego, mistaking ourselves to be a form, do we see other forms. So the state of achalatvam is not the state of, doesn't mean that we are seeing everything. It means we're just being as we actually are. But this, because people don't clearly understand this distinction between the two senses in which the term witness is used, there's a lot of confusion. People often say it is the witness consciousness that is knowing the world, and they take that witness consciousness to be Brahman. But sometimes they say, no, well, it's not actually. Brahman is even behind that witness consciousness. But if we're talking about what knows the world, that is ego.
There are some questions sort of related to this thing of the form and the formless.
Yes.
Should we just?
Yes, certainly.
Yeah, so I thought we'd do that and then go back to the original order. So there's this sort of two together. One is, this is in the context of form and formless manifestations of divinity. Does this mean that our tendency to seek well-being is also a diluted form of God, since nothing can be separate from him? Is this why Ganesha, the destroyer of difficulties, and Lakshmi, prosperity, well-being, etc., are a form of divinity? Everything is absorbed by the grace of Bhagwan Aruṇācala. And then just sort of following on this, could it be that this whole Krishna thing mentioned above is merely a semantic argument, that some call Krishna the essence of divinity, while others call him Aruṇācala?
Yeah. Okay. The first part of the question was.
Yeah.
So sorry. Sorry.
Yes, yes. No, I'll just say this again. Does this mean that this is in the context of form and formless versions of manifestations of divinity? Does this mean that our tendency to seek well-being is also a diluted form of God, since nothing can be separate from him? Is this why Ganesha, the destroyer of difficulties, and Lakshmi, prosperity, well-being, etc., are a form of divinity? Everything is absorbed, one could say, is everything absorbed by the grace of Bhagwan Aruṇācala?
Okay, can I answer that bit first? What we are all seeking, what every living being, every sentient being is seeking, is happiness. We are seeking, but because we think happiness is something other than ourselves, we're seeking it outside. So we all have our own idea of what will make us happy. If I have more money, I'll be happy. If I have all my difficulties removed, I'll be happy. If I have more learning, I'll be happy. If I have better security, I'll be happy. If I get a promotion in my job, I'll be happy, or something. So we all, if I eat tastier food, I'll be happy. Whatever it is, whatever we are seeking from that. Ultimately, we are seeking happiness. Happiness in the form of satisfaction. The satisfaction of our desires we experience as happiness. Because we have many desires, we tend to worship, we tend to ask God for many things. So it is a natural tendency of human beings to associate particular forms with the fulfillment of particular desires. This isn't only in Hinduism. Even in Christianity, for example, there are different saints who are supposed to have different efficacy. I can't remember. I think, for example, for travelers, St. Christopher is supposed to be the patron saint of travelers. So if you're going on a journey, you pray to St. Christopher for protection, but you safely arrive at your destination. You'll find many Roman Catholics, they'll have a little icon of St. Christopher, a little magnetic icon they keep in their car. And there's a different...
St. Anthony, if you've lost something, St. Anthony is the one.
St. Anthony, yes. So if you've lost something, St. Anthony, I was trying to remember which one that was. So we're different saints for different things. So this is a natural human tendency. But when we have many desires, we tend to worship many gods. That's why in Hinduism that plays out to a full extent. There are numerous gods in Hinduism. Different gods have different efficacy. And we all know the main gods, the Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva. No one really worships Brahma, but Vishnu, Shiva, and the different goddesses, Lakshmi, Saraswati, and Parvati. But there are many, many different forms of God. There are different village deities, there are different family deities. So people worship different deities for the fulfillment of different desires. So long as we have many desires, it's natural to worship many deities. But as our bhakti matures, we come to understand that ultimately God is one. So whatever name and form we worship, we're ultimately worshiping that one God. So for the immature people, they like to worship many different names and forms of God. For many people, it's like an insurance policy. On Shivaratri, you go to a Shiva temple. On Krishnashtami, you go to a Krishna temple. On Ramanavami, you go to a Rama temple. Because it's like an insurance policy. You want to get the grace of all the different gods. Because there's not yet even though they will also say, oh, all gods are one, but they don't really understand that. If we really understand God is one, we'll be satisfied worshipping just one God, one name and form of God. But so in the more immature bhakti, there's a taste to go to many different gods, to pray to many different gods. As the bhakti matures, we tend to come to one. So then that is what is called Ishtadeva. So we take one form, Krishna or Rama or Shiva or whatever it is. We take one particular form, we focus all our devotion on that one form, and then we consider, it is my beloved Krishna who appeared in the form of Rama, it's my beloved Krishna who appeared in the form of Shiva. That is, we don't look down on the other forms of God, we just consider it is my beloved God who appears in all these different forms. So if I happen to go to a Shiva temple, I'll worship Shiva, I'll worship Krishna in the form of Shiva. But so this is, by having an Ishtadeva, we come to the devotion becomes more focused, more one-pointed. So for the Krishna Bhakti, they'll tend to go only to Krishna temples. But if by chance they happen to go to some other temple, they'll see the deity in that temple as Krishna in that form. This is what is called Ishtadeva. So when we have an Ishtadeva, then the mind becomes more focused. And the purification, because the devotion is more focused, the purification it speeds up, so to speak. And then, but you can be worshipping, just having one Ishtadeva, but still asking that Ishtadeva for removing your obstacles, giving you, if you're short of money, please give me the money I need. Please, if you're sick, you pray for good health or whatever it is. So you still pray to your Ishtadeva for your well-being. But as the devotion matures still further, then you think, why should I be asking Krishna for all these things? Krishna is so gracious, he gives me whatever I want. But isn't it petty to be asking him for all these things? Surely the giver is greater than the gifts. Surely Krishna is greater than anything that he can give me. So why should I ask Krishna for this or that? Krishna knows better than me what is good for me. So let me just pray to Krishna for Krishna alone. Then we go beyond Kamya Bhakti to Nishkamya Bhakti. That is, we stop asking God for this or that, And we just pray to him for more love, for more bhakti, for more, to give us the love to surrender ourselves completely to him. When Bhagavan, from verse 3 onwards in Upadesha Undiyar, the bhakti Bhagavan is talking about is Nishkamiya bhakti. He makes that very clear. He says that Kartanukakam Nishkarmiya karma. The Nishkarmiya karma, that Nishkarmiya means, Karmiya bhakti is bhakti for the sake of the fulfillment of desires, for your well-being, for removal of difficulties, for the acquisition of whatever you think you need. Nishkamiya bhakti means you're not asking God for anything. You're just worshipping God for the love of God. So that's what Bhagavan talks about from verse 3. So he says, Nishkamiya karma, done for God. Kartanukakam means done for God. That implies done for the love of God, will purify the mind and show the way to liberation. That is, he makes it clear there, Nishkamiya karma done for God, that's Nishkamiya bhakti, is not itself the way to liberation, but it will purify the mind and show the way to liberation. Then he talks about what are the types of Nishkamiya karma we can do. In the next verse he says, this is certain, puja, japa and dhyana are actions of mind, speech, and of body, speech, and mind. And in this order, one is superior to one. That is, more efficacious than puja, which is an action of the body, is japa, which is an action of speech. More efficacious than japa is dhyana, which is an action of the mind. When he says more efficacious, well, he says superior actually, but implied more efficacious. That means more efficacious in purifying the mind. Then he goes through each of these. He gives a very broad definition of puja, but considering all the 8 forms, all the different forms of the world to be forms of God, and worshipping accordingly is good worship of God. So he gives that's a very broad definition of puja. So if you do anything, considering, if you see a hungry person, if you consider it's God in the form of that hungry person, you offer food, that is good worship of God, for example. Then he talks about japa. And he said that japa, if it's done mentally, then it's a type of dhyana. Then he talks about dhyana, and he talks about the need for uninterrupted dhyana. If we try to meditate on God, and our mind keeps on getting distracted by other thoughts, that means we've got more interest in those other thoughts than we have in God. So when the love becomes stronger, the meditation on God becomes uninterrupted. So up to verse 7, he's talking about Nishkamiya karma. That is Nishkamiya bhakti, that is actions done for Nishkamiya bhakti. So he doesn't take Nishkamiya karma to be a separate part, but an integral part of the early stages of the path of bhakti. And the path of bhakti begins only when the bhakti becomes Nishkamiya. Then, but in verse 8, there's an important change. I explained about verse 8 earlier. He says, rather than Anya Bhava, meditating on God as if he were other than oneself, Ananya Bhava, in which he is I, that is meditating on him as nothing other than I. In other words, meditating on I alone, that is best among all. This verse 8 is the transition from the Nishkamiya karma to the state of just being. That is, so long as we are meditating on God as something other than ourselves, that is still a mental activity. But when we meditate upon him as I, in other words, when we practice Atma-vichara, when we attend only to I, the mind thereby subsides. So it's not an action, but a cessation of action. Therefore, in verse 9, he says, Bhava Balatinal, that means by the strength of meditation. In the context, that implies by the strength of the Ananya Bhava, in other words, by the strength of the self-attentiveness, the meditation on the Swarupa Dhyana, the meditation on oneself alone, understanding that oneself is God, So by the strength of that meditation, bhavanatita satbhavatu irakale, being in satbhava. Satbhava means a state of being which transcends bhavana. Bhavana in that context implies meditation in the form of a mental activity. So in the state of being, there's no mental activity. So it transcends mental activity. That is parabhakti tattva. So that is the supreme love. So this is the course of the spiritual path. Sadhu Om has explained this very nicely in the Bhakti chapter of in the supplement of the Path of Sri Ramana. So we start off worshipping many names and forms of God for the fulfillment of our desires. Then we mature onto ekabhakti. We worship just one, we focus our devotion on one name and form of God, still praying for the fulfillment of our desires. Then we progress further, but we cease asking for anything from God, and we just pray for the love of God alone. We do that. That is the path of nishkamya bhakti. And you can practice nishkamya bhakti in the form of puja, japa, or dhyana. But when the mind gets matured further, it then comes to a point where it understands God cannot be something other than myself. God, how can I be something other than God? That is, He alone is the sole reality. So He is what is shining in me as I. So we meditate on Him as ourself. And that brings us to the state of being. That is the supreme devotion. Because the state of being is the state of complete surrender, when we cease rising as ego. Does that adequately answer the first part of that question?
I think so, yes.
Right. And then what was the second part? There was another part?
Yes, there was another part which was, could it be that this whole Krishna thing mentioned above is merely a semantic argument? That is, some call Krishna the essence of divinity, while others call him Arunachala.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, God has to be one. So whatever that is, different people are attracted to different names and forms. So what the Krishna Bhakta worships as Krishna is what the Arunachala Bhakta worships as Arunachala. But the reality is one and the same.
The question is, in the Bible, Jesus teaches, love your neighbor as yourself. How does this relate to the Advaitic understanding that there is no other, an idea that a Christian interested in Advaita might find difficult to accept? How can there be love when there is no other?
That question, how can there be love when there's no other, is very simply answered by Bhagavan in the first sentence of Nana. He doesn't answer it explicitly, but implicitly. He points out the simple truth. Since for everyone, the greatest love is only for oneself. We all love ourselves more than we love others. If we love others, we love those who are, we love God because God is gracious to us. We love our wife and children because and our parents, because we think they are interested in our welfare. If our children start to give us endless trouble, our love for them will slowly diminish, because we naturally love what contributes to our happiness. So the greatest love is the love that we have for ourselves. If we are to have complete love for God, we must love God as ourselves. So long as we see God as another, our love will be divided between our love for ourselves and the love we give to God. if we understand that God is our own reality, then only does the bhakti become purna bhakti, full bhakti. When there's no differences, is love. Does love reach its fullness? So this idea that you have to have another to love is based upon a lack of deep thinking. If you think about it deeply, we all love ourselves. So there's no wrong in loving ourselves. It's our nature to love ourselves. But what is wrong is that we take ourselves to be this little person. So we love, because I take myself to be Michael, I love Michael, and I love Michael more than I love any other thing. But if I understand that what I actually am is the underlying reality of all things, then the love becomes full. We love everything as ourselves. What Jesus says in the Bible is, love your neighbor as yourself. How can you love your neighbor as yourself if you don't experience your neighbor as yourself? If you experience your neighbor as someone other than yourself, you cannot love them as yourself. So loving your neighbor as yourself implies knowing your neighbor as yourself, recognizing that your neighbor is none other than yourself. That is, we can have that as a mental attitude, but that's not the real thing. I mean, as Bhagavan says in Nana, in the end of the 19th paragraph, he says, whatever is given to others is given to oneself. If this truth is known, who will not give to others? But the trouble is, so long as we identify ourselves as this body, we experience ourselves as something other than those around us. So we cannot truly love our neighbor as ourselves so long as we limit ourselves as this person. In order to love our neighbor as ourselves, we need to know ourselves as we actually are. When we know ourselves as we actually are, then nothing will be experienced as other than ourselves, because we have what we actually are is the underlying reality of all things.
Just to say that one of the sort of contributions of Christianity and even of Buddhism is this emphasis on love, sort of in the everyday conventional reality that we live in, and to love or compassion. And although ultimately, of course, it flows from the love of oneself, I think at a social level, sort of in our everyday life, it's extremely useful and sort of points us in the right direction, even in our practice. Because sometimes what happens is that people forget this. You know, it's like sort of the reminder of nonviolence, I mean, which is the same thing, that the mind which is full of compassion, the mind, and yet with of clarity and discrimination, of course, you know, one must not be foolishly compassionate in the sense of being silly about things, but genuine compassion, genuine love, sort of having that inclination, that attitude, as you said, towards that is very, very important, because it kind of, it sort of softens the ego, if one can put it that way, a little bit, you know, these boundaries we put in place. So I think it's quite a useful exercise.
Yes, definitely.
And they're very important socially, because you can have such terrible things happening simply because there's a lack of compassion, I mean, at all levels of society. So yeah.
That is, selfishness is the very opposite of true spirituality, because selfishness is based upon a very strong identification with myself as this person that I seem to be. When we are following this spiritual path, we are trying to go beyond this limitation. So we are, and naturally, as by Bhagavan's grace, as our mind is purified, as we subside more and more, the boundaries between ourselves and others will gradually dissolve, so to speak. So a very selfish person, if they see someone else suffering, they won't care. But as we, by his grace, we subside more and more, when we see someone suffering, it pains us to see suffering because we see ourselves in their position. And so the suffering we see in others is suffering for ourselves. I mean, we experience it as our own suffering. That is what compassion means. Compassion means suffering with. So when we as on the spiritual path, automatically, if we're truly following the spiritual path, we'll automatically become less and less selfish. We'll become more and more compassionate, caring, empathetic, less wrapped up in our little self. Our little self means this person we take ourselves to be.
The next question, thank you so much, Michael. That's very helpful. The next question is, could I ask, if you do not mind speaking about it, when you are moved to tears by the words of Bhagwan, would you say it is a combination of deep gratitude mixed in with a kind of personal sorrow or grief? We are all dying, psychologically speaking, when attempting to approach the true teachings of Bhagwan. So surely grief and sorrow must be a natural part of this process from the ego's point of view. Thank you.
I don't feel like that so much. I just feel, I mean, Bhagavan's words move me. When I think of his grace, it moves me. It's not because of sadness, it's because of happiness, because I myself, I'm a hopeless case. So it's, I'm fully dependent on Bhagavan's grace. So his words give me great joy. So they're not tears of sadness, but tears of joy. If I shed tears, if I'm moved by Bhagavan's words, I'm moved by joy at Bhagavan's incredible love. His all-consuming love for us.
Shiva, would you like to ask a question? There is one in the chat box.
Yes, I would. Do you think it's possible that on other planets with intelligent life, there may be portals like Arunachala, which eradicate the ignorance of individuality?
Arunachala is, though Arunachala appears as a hill on this planet, Arunachala is in no way limited to that form. Arunachala is the infinite whole in which all the universes, Bhagavan says in the second verse of Arunachala Pancharatnam. Wait a second, I'll just get it. Chittirama Mishtalam, all this which is a picture, Semele, he's addressing Arunachala Semele, that means the red hill. Nimbale, in you, Uttidamai Nindre Odungirum. All this, he's referring to the whole universe, which is a picture. It arises, stands, and subsides in you. So for Bhagavan, everything is in Arunachala. Nityamum, always, eternally, nanendru ideyam naditturuvai. You always dance in the heart as I. Naditturuvayal. Since you always dance in the heart as I, they say your name is heart. So Arunachala is that which is dancing in our heart as I, and it is that in which all this entire creation arises, stands, and subsides. So there's no planet in this universe where Arunachala is not present, because everything is present only in Arunachala. So for us, why should we think about other planets? this is all the outward going inclination of mind when we begin to think of what there may be in other planets and so on. It doesn't matter. In any sentient being, what is shining as I is Aruṇācala, as Bhagavan says here. Because Aruṇācala is the heart of everything. It's the heart means the center. It's the center because Aruṇācala is what everything essentially is. He is the being that appears as all these multitude of different names and forms, all these phenomena. The isness, the being of any phenomena, that isness is Aruṇācala.
I understand that. You asked, what does it matter? And I was thinking, well, what if there are planets older than Earth that have had these portals, such as Aruṇācala, which allowed beings to become realized beings, and Bhagavan became a realized being also, which would initiate him into the lineage of realized beings that are helping others to become realized beings throughout the universe. That was the focus of the question.
Yes, yes. But we also need to remember what Bhagavan's deeper teaching, that this world, this entire universe, is no more real than any world we see in a dream. So all we need to do, we've been given these teachings by Bhagavan. If we turn within to know ourselves as we actually are, we will thereby wake up from this dream, and thereby, as he says in Aksharamlai, for example, in verse 27 of Aksharamlai, Sakalamam Virangam, Kadiroli Inamada, he refers to Aruṇācala as the sun of bright rays that swallows everything. Because when we are swallowed by Aruṇācala, everything is swallowed along with us. And he says the same in the first verse of Aruṇācala Pancharatnam. Arol Nirevana Amrakadale, the ocean of nectar, which is the fullness of grace. Viri Kadiral Yavam Virangam. In your spreading rays, you swallow everything. Aruna Giri Paramatma Ve, or Paramatma in the form of Aruna Giri, Kila Ulapu Nandrai, my Ulapu, that the heart lotus, the heart flower, which is just beginning to killer means it's beginning to blossom. Nandrai Viriti Parityaha Blangu. Shine as the sun to make it blossom fully. So we need to think less and less about the external world and more about the reality that is ever shining in our heart as I. That is Aruṇācala. And that same Aruṇācala is shining in the heart of every sentient being.
Okay, thank you so much, Michael.
Yeah, right. You're welcome.
Gilbert or Gilbert, I'm not sure how you liked your name pronounced. Would you like to ask a question?
Yes. It is just that I don't have the question written in front of me.
Would you like me to just read it out, Gilbert? I'm sorry, because your question kind of like went into two parts, so I thought maybe you wanted to.
Thank you. Yes, please. Yes.
Yeah. So the question is, you mentioned earlier that free will exists when we rise as ego. On the other hand, when we talk about the doer in the ego, we say that it is only apparent, that everything just happens by grace. Should we refer to free will as apparent free will? Then is the karma only apparent too? I once read that Sri Bhagavan answered that even the smallest movement, like taking a glass of water, is predetermined. The implication of this comment is to understand the action of the ego in the outside world.
everything is only seeming. The only thing that is real is our own being, I am. This ego itself is not real. It is an unreal appearance. And only in the view of ego, all other things appear. So everything is only seeming. But when we are talking about, for example, about the law of karma, of course it's all seeming, but it's as real as our existence as ego. So the whole law of karma is based upon freedom of will and freedom of action. If we had no freedom of will and action, it would be meaningless to make us experience the fruit of our actions, because the fruit of our actions, we wouldn't be responsible for it if we've got no freedom of will and action. So it is when we misuse our freedom of will and action that we do what is called agamya. That is action that we do under the sway of our will, under the sway of our vasanas. Those actions that we do under the sway of our vasanas yield fruit. The fruit is stored in what is called sanchita. Sanchita means a heap or pile. That's the sanchita is the fruit of all our past actions that we haven't yet experienced. Because when we experience a fruit, it's finished. Just like if you eat a mango, you can't eat the same mango twice. Once you've eaten mango, it's finished. So when we experience the fruit of any action, that fruit is finished. So from the sanchita, which is a vast, vast heap, God selects in each lifetime a certain set of fruit for us to experience. So whatever we are given to experience in this life is called prarabdha, or fate, or destiny. That is all preordained. But while experiencing that destiny, we are still having likes and dislikes. We're still acting under the sway of our wills. So we're experiencing the fruit of past actions and creating fresh fruit by doing fresh actions. So some of the things that have been recorded of what Bhagavan said, that is, Bhagavan would talk in a very nuanced manner. Sometimes when the people who recorded what Bhagavan said, they didn't always understand the subtleties. So often it comes across in the recordings as not exactly as Bhagavan meant it. What is preordained is the fruit of our past actions. That is what we are given to experience in this lifetime. But while experiencing that, we still have the freedom of will and action. So if Bhagavan makes this very clear in the note he wrote for his mother. In the first sentence, he says, Avarava prarabdha prakaram adakanavan angangirundu atavipan. That means, in accordance with the prarabdha, the destiny of each one, he who is for that, being there, will cause to dance. What that implies is, in order for us to experience our prarabdha, certain actions are necessary on our part. For example, if it's your destiny to be a doctor, in order to be a doctor, you have to study, you have to pass exams, and so on. So you will be made to do those actions in order to experience the prarabdha of being a doctor. But just because so who makes you do those actions? God. When he says he who is for that, he's referring to God, the one who ordains the fruit of action. So we will be made to do actions that are necessary for the prarabdha to be experienced. However, just because an action is an action we are made to do in accordance with our prarabdha, doesn't mean necessarily that it is not an agamya, because most of the actions we do, we are also doing under the sway of our will. So, for example, if someone becomes a doctor, it's their destiny to make all the effort to study and pass the exams. But most people who become doctor also have a liking to be a doctor for one reason or another. They want to be a doctor. So the fact that it so happens that what they want coincides with what is destined to happen. So that not only are they being made to do those actions by God in accordance with their destiny, they're also doing the action under the sway of their own will. So many of the actions we do, people say, how do we know whether this action is prarabdha or agamya? Well, firstly, prarabdha is not an action. Prarabdha is a fruit of an action. It's what we experience which is prarabdha. What Bhagavan says in that sentence, in accordance with our prarabdha, God makes us act. So what the question amounts to, how do we know whether an action is an action we're made to do by God or an action we choose to do? It is not so simple, because often the actions we are made to do by God are actions we also want to do because we want to become a doctor, for example. So our actions are being driven by two forces. Firstly, by the will of God in accordance with our prarabdha. Secondly, by our will in accordance with our likes, dislikes, desires, and so on. So when Bhagavan says, when he was asked the question about drinking a glass of water, drinking a glass of water is that is experiencing that drinking the water. If you're very thirsty, it may not be your destiny to have water, so you don't get water. So if you drink the water, that means it was your destiny to drink that water. But you may also be drinking that water with great desire. I'm thirsty. Oh, I rush to the tap and fill a glass and drink the water. Because you're thirsty. So just because an action is according to destiny doesn't mean that it's not also according to your will. So we need to distinguish, that is, what fate determines is what we are to experience. What our free will determines, well, I wouldn't even say free will, our freedom of will, to be more precise, because the term free will is a very confusing term. It's used by people often to mean freedom of action. So to be precise, our freedom of will determines what we want to experience. So in the note Bhagavan wrote for his mother, after saying, in accordance with our prarabdha, God will make us act, he then goes on to say, Endram naduvadadu, envichikanum naduvadu. That means what is never to happen will not happen, however much effort is made. When he says whatever is to happen, he means whatever is destined to happen. When he says however much effort is made, what he implies by that is something is not destined to happen. So it's never going to happen. But just because something isn't going to happen, doesn't stop us wanting it to happen. It doesn't stop us trying to make it happen. That's why he says, however much effort, when he says envichkanam, however much effort is made, that clearly implies that we have a freedom of will and action. Because he doesn't just say what is never going to happen is not going to happen. He says it's not going to happen however much effort is made. So that however much effort is made is clearly referring to our freedom of will and action. Then in the next sentence he says, Nadapadu entade seinum niladu. What is to happen will not stop in spite of any amount of doing any amount of obstacle. So if it's our destiny to experience something that we don't want to experience, we can try to avoid it. We can want to avoid it, we can try to avoid it, but we cannot avoid it. So what we need to understand from this, we have freedom of will, we have freedom of action, at least to a limited extent, but we have no freedom of experience. What we are destined to experience, that alone we will experience. We cannot avoid what we are destined to experience. We cannot experience anything but we are not destined to experience. Yeah, and then in the next sentence he says, Iduve tinnam, this is certain. So Bhagavan is very, very clear and emphatic about that. Then in the last sentence he says, Ahalin monamai irake nandru. Therefore, being silent is good. What does he mean by being silent? Does he mean that we should stop all actions? Obviously not, because whatever actions we need to do in accordance with destiny will be made to do. What he means by being silent is not rising as ego, with likes and dislikes to do this or to do that. So the state of being silent is the state of surrender, where we cease rising as ego. Whatever happened, it's the sweet will of God. Let it happen. Is that a clear explanation?
Yes, yes, thank you very much. The actual understanding that I was trying to clarify was, on one hand, while attending completely to who we are, we have to give up all objects and phenomena.
Yeah.
As you clearly said.
Yes.
On the other hand, we are drawn outside to actions, most of us, because we exist as ego. And it is the implication, how do we have to disregard all these external actions as, on one hand, we say they are dreamlike.
Yes. We have to discard them. This is clearly what Bhagavan says in verse 16 of Upadesha Undiyar. He says, Veli vidayangale vittu. That means giving up or letting go of external vishayas, that external phenomena. In other words, not attending to anything other than ourselves. Manam tanori uru ordale unmeyonityam. The mind knowing its own form of light is true awareness. The mind its form of light means it's the essential nature of the mind is awareness. So the mind knowing its own awareness, that is the true awareness. If we know our true, if we turn our attention in to know what we actually are, we thereby automatically let go of everything else. So why he says he starts the verse with the clause, giving up external phenomena, is to emphasize how much we have to turn our attention within to know our own form of light. So the prarabdha will go on. So long as there's ego, there will be prarabdha. But we need not concern ourselves with the prarabdha. In fact, if we understand what Bhagavan has taught us about the law of karma, the whole purpose of the law of karma as taught by Bhagavan, I mean, the reason why Bhagavan taught us the law of karma is to make us understand that whatever effort we make to experience anything externally isn't going to make any difference, because what is never to happen will not happen, however much we want it to happen, however much we try to make it happen. What is to happen will not stop, however much we try to obstruct it. So what is destined to happen in this life is going to happen whether we like it or not. So we shouldn't concern ourselves with external actions. We should only concern ourselves with investigating who am I, the one who acts with under the sway of its vasanas and experiences the fruit. So we are to investigate the one who experiences itself as the doer and experiencer. We're not interested in any experience. We're interested in knowing the reality of the experiencer.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
The next question. when vichara is continued for a long enough time, when thought doesn't arise anymore, and one continues to attend to the self, one experiences the state of ahamspuram, of ahamspurana. At this stage, if the ego is not completely annihilated and the self is not realized, then what is this intermediate stage of ahamspurana? Is it subjective consciousness? Kindly explain about reflected consciousness and subjective consciousness. Thank you.
It's not, if we turn our attention back towards ourself, we experience a certain degree of ahamsparana. Ahamsparana means clear shining or clarity. So what Bhagavan described as ahamsparana is the clarity of self-awareness. To the extent to which we attend to ourselves, we thereby experience a clarity of awareness. When we are attending to other things, we experience ourselves as I am this body. But the more we attend to ourself alone, to I am alone, the more we experience ourselves as something distinct from this body, as just that mere awareness I am. That clarity is what is called ahamsparana. It's simply a clarity of self-awareness. So the deeper we go in the practice of self-attentiveness, the more clearly that sparana will shine. So sparana is just a degree of clarity. So the deeper we go, the greater that degree of clarity. Regarding reflected consciousness, that is, the term in Sanskrit is chidabhasa. Though it's often translated as reflected consciousness, what it actually means, abhasa means a likeness or a semblance. So just like when you look in the mirror and see your face, what you're seeing in the mirror is not actually your face. It's only a likeness of your face. So but a secondary meaning of abhasa is reflection. So chidabhasa means the semblance of awareness or reflection of awareness. That is, that's a term used to distinguish the pure awareness from the awareness that is ego. That is, ego is the reflected awareness, the seeming awareness. Why it is called seeming is pure awareness is not aware of anything other than itself, because pure awareness is real awareness, or awareness as it actually is. It's not aware of anything other than what actually exists. What actually exists is only pure awareness. So in the view of pure awareness, there's nothing other than itself. That is why Bhagavan called pure awareness as sutatrarivu. That means intransitive awareness. That means awareness that is not aware of any objects. It's just the pure awareness. It's not, there are no objects of awareness, no content of awareness. There's just pure awareness. So that is what is called Suddha Chaitanya. That is what Bhagavan calls sutatrarivu, or intransitive awareness. Ego is transitive awareness. Transitive awareness means object-knowing awareness. When we rise as ego, we project and become aware of all these phenomena. So ego is transitive awareness. Transitive means knowing objects. So so ego is the reflected awareness. The real awareness is the pure awareness. So when we experience nothing other than I am, as for example we do in sleep, that is the state of pure awareness. When we are aware of ourselves as I am this person, and consequently aware of so many other things, that is the state of seeming awareness or reflected awareness. Why it is called seeming awareness? Because we are aware of things that do not actually exist, but merely seem to exist. So it's not real awareness, But real awareness is not aware of anything other than what actually is. What actually is only that real awareness. So you asked about reflected awareness, and the other one was, one other term was there.
The question was
just at the end, there was something about.
Yeah, this is about, yes, this is about aham spurana.
Yeah.
And is it subjective consciousness? And kindly explain about reflected consciousness and subjective consciousness.
Okay, subjective consciousness. For talking about subjective and objective is not very clear, because we often talk about a subjective impression of something. You may see a thing one way, I may see the same thing another way. So we each have our own subjective awareness of it. So it doesn't have any precise meaning. Bhagavan is much more precise when he uses the term, well, in Tamil it's sutarivu. The closest we can say in English is transitive awareness. That means object knowing awareness. So the object knowing awareness is ego. The pure awareness, the awareness that knows no objects, that knows just itself, that is pure awareness. So the distinction is between transitive and intransitive awareness, object knowing awareness and pure awareness. Chidabhasa is object knowing awareness.
So duality and non-duality.
Yeah, exactly. In transitive awareness, ego is the subject, and everything else, and everything you experience are objects. So that's duality. The first primary duality is the subject-object duality. And as soon as we rise as ego, that subject-object duality comes into being. Because we limit ourselves and therefore see so many things other than ourselves.
The next question. Could Michael please explain why Brahman is considered Sat Chit, the reality of the jiva, and not, for example, Shiva or Krishna or Kali, etc.?
Shiva, Kali, Krishna, all these different names and forms of God are names and forms of the one reality, which is Brahman. So all gods are in their essence Brahman, just like we are in our essence Brahman. Gods appear as names and forms because we mistake ourselves to be a name and form. So long as we experience ourselves as a form, we cannot conceive of God as formless. Or even if we have a conception of God as formless, that conception is itself a form. That's why Bhagavan says in verse 4 of Ulladu Napadu, if oneself is a form, the world and God will be likewise. If oneself is not a form, who can see their forms and how? So the reality is Brahman, which is Satchidananda. That is the reality of God and the reality of ourselves. When we rise as an ego, taking ourselves to be a form, God also appears to be a form, even though he is actually our own reality, which is Satchidananda or Brahman.
Does Sri Ramana recommend a final worship to transcend the limited view of the Ishtadevata? Or are we tethered for the duration of this life? And then it says, never mind, you answered the question in real time.
Okay, well, the worship of an Ishtadeva is a worship of a name and form, but the reality of that Ishtadeva is what is shining in our heart as I. So by worshipping the Ishtadeva, by the grace of that Ishtadeva, our mind is purified. And in that purified mind, clarified mind, we recognize that though God appears outwardly in the form of my Ishtadeva, he's actually always my own reality. And so we turn within. That is what Bhagavan is talking about in this verse. We first think of Aruṇācala as an external name and form, but that external name and form, by the grace of that external name and form, we are outward going mental activities is subdued. Our mind is drawn within to face the reality of Aruṇācala, which is shining in the heart as I. Thereby we are made motionless like him, and thereby he swallows us. So the worship of name and form leads seamlessly to the worship of the reality of that name and form, which is what is shining in our heart as I.
There's a follow-up to the last question, which is, isn't Brahman also a form as well?
No. Brahman, well, of course, any conception we have of Brahman is a finite conception, but what the name Brahman refers to is the infinite reality that is beyond all names and forms. Any form is limited. The reality is infinite. So Brahman is beyond all names and forms. But we cannot conceive of Brahman as it actually is, so long as we experience ourselves as a name and form. That's why, in order to know Brahman as it actually is, that's when I read out the meaning of verse 8 of Ulludunapali, that's what Bhagavan is talking about there. He doesn't actually use the word God there. He talks about that porul. Porul means vastu, that reality, that's real substance. This is a follow-on from a previous verse in which he says, though though awareness in the world, awareness there is referring to the mind, though awareness in the world rise and subside simultaneously, it is only by awareness that the world shines. In other words, the world is known only by the awareness. That the awareness means mind or ego. And then he says in the next sentence, the ground that shines without appearing and disappearing, or that which shines as the ground for the appearing and disappearing of the mind, meaning awareness, meaning the mind and the world, but itself exists without appearing or disappearing. That is the porul, which is purna, which is full. And then he goes on to say in the next verse, if one worships that reality, that formless, that infinite reality, as giving it whatever name, in whatever name, giving whatever name in whatever form, that is the way to see it in name and form. However, knowing one's own reality and thereby subsiding and merging in the reality of that supreme substance, that real substance, and becoming one with it, that is the true seeing. So we can only know Brahman as it is by turning our attention within, knowing ourselves as, thereby knowing ourselves as we actually are. When we know ourselves as we actually are, by turning our mind within, we subside. When we subside and merge back into what we actually are, we thereby know our own reality, and that is knowing Brahman as it actually is. We can know Brahman can never be an object of awareness, an object of knowledge. We can know Brahman only by being Brahman. That's why Bhagavan says in verse 26 of Upadeshundiya, Tanai iritale tanne aritlam. Being oneself alone is knowing oneself. So it's a knowing quite unlike any other knowing. When we know objects, we are knowing something other than ourselves. It's a mental activity. To know something other than ourselves is a mental activity. But to know ourselves is not a mental activity. It is just being as we actually are. Because what we actually are is pure awareness. And pure awareness knows pure awareness just by being pure awareness. And that pure awareness is Brahman.
Thank you very, very much, Michael. That was really a very, very important session.
Yeah.
And thank you,
This
everyone.
is a very important verse.
We'll close with Bhagwan's mantra. Om Namo Bhagavate Śrī Ramanaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Śrī Ramanaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Śrī Ramanaya.